course, is not going to do the blackout for the screen today, just because it wants to be different every time. Good morning, everyone. It's your girls from Obscure Orations, me, Tay, her, Dana. And today with us, we have a special guest, another author, I'm going to go with indie author because I don't think that you're as widespread as, we'll go with the comparison of Stephen, I almost said Stephen Hawking. Stephen King.
Yeah, sure. Or Stephen King, or, any of the Stephens.
Yeah, it's like any of the Stephens that everyone might know.
Yeah.
Don't know why Hawking's is it's the most random one. But today we have the talented Bill Wittur with us, and we're going to talk about a little bit of everything. As most people know, we start off on a topic, and then where we end, nobody knows. We go down so many rabbit holes and find different paths, and then we end up in like Narnia by the end of it. Going,
okay.
How did we get
here? Yeah. Being the content of Bill's book, I can see so many rabbit holes. So many.
That was the plan.
All right, so let's start off with, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, and then we'll start diverging from there.
Okay, yeah. So I self-published my book Extinction Event in 2023, in the fall of 2003. Being new to the business, that was terrible timing, because you're at the end of the arc of 1 year and into the arc for another year, so you miss the holiday season, all that stuff. But we can jump into that in a second. The ups and downs of self-publishing. Extinction Event really came out of an experience trying to keep the short version from going back to school and learning about different things associated with music theory. So it was a music and digital media program.
Okay.
So it's pretty much exactly as it sounds: music theory, music history, that kind of stuff, and digital media, working with video and recording. And in stuff like the recording side of things, I started to pick up on, ideas about frequency ranges, what the human can hear, what animals hear. And then at the same time, a number of students were using AI for doing image generation. And I had already been aware of large language models, LLMs, which are used basically as kind of the background or core of AI, as we call it today.
Okay.
And so it opened up this, oh, wow, okay, this is all being used for the arts. It's being used for different aspects of image creation or music creation or other forms of art generation, that kind of thing. But one of the things that really caught my attention, and this was the key point of DNA, was that there's groups like, there's an organization called Earth Species Project, ESP. And they're using AI, large language models, to try and decode language of creatures like whales or dolphins, and actually find ways to bridge that gap. And that just, when I discovered that these people are doing really cool stuff with AI, that just blew my mind. And so I extrapolated, I put it into my own personal context of a middle-aged guy going back to school, and he discovers something going on with some of the recordings of digital versus analog music songs that he really likes and favors. And then the whole story just kind of unwinds from there, just kind of accidentally almost. He meets up with his recording instructor. The recording instructor introduces him to a guy named Eugene Case. Eugene Case is a term I coined called omnibioacoustic expert, and that's somebody who basically listens to everything. And so this guy Eugene tells him how to interpret or at least identify what's being present in these glitches between analog and digital recordings. And when he does that, he discovers an AI platform at the same time called Gaia. Gaia is short for Global Artificial Intelligence Accumulation. And Gaia is a representation of artificial intelligence being used by this character, Sylvie Hunter, who developed artificial intelligence for creating things like fake news and modified stories or that kind of stuff for a group of people that she's working for. And then the whole story just kind of spills out from there. So that's kind of a nice little, kind of a little bit of a teaser without not trying to get into too many spoilers. But yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's always
Oh.
the hard part when you're just like, okay, I want to talk about every detail so that we can be like, okay,
Yeah.
so then we're going to dissect every part of this.
Yeah. Authors, I'm good at writing 400 pages. I'm terrible at synopsis. Right? So
I think that's how like all of us are when we're like, okay, like even when I tell my friends about stuff that I'm writing, I'm like, it's about a person
yeah, it's a book.
who does things, and they're like, you're horrible at this. I'm like, I am trying really hard not to give away all of the information because some people aren't like me. Like for me, I absolutely love spoilers. I'm like, I will Google the hell out of something and be like, I will find all the details and be like, okay,
Yeah.
so this part happens at this time and this happens there.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah. So, and I don't mind getting into kind of the superficial version of the spoilers because you know that can still be a 5-minute conversation.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You know, talking about a 400-page book. It's like, well, how did that all kind of connect together?
Yep.
Is really what the purpose of the book is. So, but I got into, I went down the rabbit holes of things like animal communication, the human hearing range, stuff that we can hear versus what animals can hear, efforts that are being made in those kind of communities, but also trying to educate or inform the reader about what's happening with AI without patting them over the head and say, like, so, some of the passages were basically the AI saying, here's what a large language model is.
Yep.
And then I also used a little bit of AI to describe, like here's a Shakespeare play about the oceans and
Okay.
and how they were getting kind of chewed up and destroyed by a lot of global corporate interests that are overfishing or doing things like using sonars, that kind of stuff, and those kind of queries by the character in the story possibly created kind of a cause and effect as far as where the story went. So
Okay.
yeah.
So it sounds like you took a lot of problems that civilization is facing, overfishing, energy, stuff like that, and then kind of like modeled that into the AI part of your book.
I did, yeah. There was I referred to one of the other main characters. Her name is Sylvie Hunter. She starts out kind of in this pre-story in the 90s as an environmental activist. She's she ultimately realizes that going to protests and throwing Molotov cocktails is not going to get anywhere but a nice little cozy seat in jail. The outcome for her, she chose the programming route, and she was the original builder of Gaia. And so Gaia is kind of an emulation of her desires and wishes. And so eventually we start to see how as Gaia becomes more and more sentient, and Gaia does become what I call autonomous intelligence. We just don't know when in the book, and that's really the key thing that I want to have people read the book and say, well, I think it happened here, and then I'd be like, oh, but did it or what, did it happen earlier or later, and how did it, what happened here as far as cause and effect goes.
It brings up, like, I could see this book being so easily used already, and I haven't gotten far into it because I'm an extremely slow reader, but I could see the book being used in future generations as something like a teaching tool to be able to say the different kind, like having it in an ethics class to say, okay,
Yeah.
at what point in time do you think or do you feel that she became her own sentient being?
Yeah.
And what makes her that way? Like, what in your mind makes her become that sentient being where it's no longer that she's just, um, I like the comparison. I don't know if you play video games at all or not.
I do quite a bit.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes. I was like, Dana and I are like, yeah. So I don't know if you've ever played the trilogy by BioWare called Mass Effect.
I know of it.
So they're one of my favorite game trilogies out there. So well told, so well done. But in it, they have artificial intelligence too, and of course, they show how it goes in
Right.
different areas around the entire galaxy. And I liked how they differentiated it, where they said there's virtual intelligence, where they're chained, they have commands, they're not allowed to have
Yes.
self thinking.
Yeah.
So it was always, I liked the differentiation of being able to say, okay, well, you have virtual intelligence. And then you had AIs that were completely illegal because they were like, it's not good if they
Yeah.
start thinking on their own.
Yeah.
And I always loved the difference between that just because you had the different groups going, well, at what point in time does it become technically an AI where you're like, okay, well, I want it to be able to self think and do math problems, some of these problems, some of that. It's like, okay, so you start kind of removing those chains and the limits on it. So at
Yeah.
what point in time do you sit there and look and go, oh no, I took one too many chains off.
Yeah.
And it's now, it's now going around going, you guys, like we have Terminator now. It's
Yeah.
you messed up.
Yeah.
We now have global domination, and I can't even say that I argue with some of the AI things that are out there where you look at how people make them and their goals are things like, hey, you have an environmentalist who makes it and wants their AI to be environmentally forward thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you
Well,
have that, technically speaking, humans aren't necessarily a good thing to have for the environment.
you
Or the worst thing to
you,
have.
you kind of nailed the second part of the synopsis. As an AI becomes sentient, my concern is that the AI is going to look at everything on the planet and first see the planet as a very unique and rare circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to say, wait a second, I'm in direct competition. It's going to have this existential crisis and say, I'm in direct competition with my creators because
Yes.
I need water and I need electricity. And I also need some of these other ecosystems to create a balance with those needs. And so, part of the evolution of the story is to say, well, what happens when an AI becomes sentient or autonomous and identifies its needs and starts to parcel out how am I going to compete for those needs versus the other competition on the planet, which is humans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it
And
makes you
so,
wonder at that point in time. It's like, okay, when its needs, like, at what point in time do its needs become more important? And then does it start taking those next steps where it's like, okay, well, you know what? I need more oil consumption for some aspect of it. But hey, Russia only produces that specific oil consumption or oil that they need. So it's like, all right. So you start killing off some of them and go, all right, well, I've culled enough of the herd. It's like deer hunting. You cull the herd
yeah,
to just thin it enough. You're like,
yeah,
okay, but now we're thinning the humans. You're like, oh,
yeah.
oh,
Well, we talked about spoilers, and I think it's pretty much in the title. The Extinction
yes.
Event is, it's just a question, I guess, at what point which element becomes extinct,
Mm-hmm.
right, or nearly extinct. So, but there is a sequel planned, and there is a prequel planned. So,
Oh,
yeah,
obviously that was
Nice.
going to be my very next question of whether you're like, are you going to continue it? So
yeah.
for the prequel aspect of it, are you going to have the same characters but going back and explaining their backstory? Or are you going to do like brand new ones that kind of introduce everything that happens in the future?
A little bit, mostly the former part of your question, where I look at the characters that I introduced in Extinction Event, and I look at their previous lives. I look at where they were roughly around the 1990s, and some of the characters. So I'll introduce another group that Sylvie Hunter works for, and it's very intentional for her to work for them. It's a group called the Plutonian Council. So if you picture like a whole bunch of like Montgomery Burnses sitting around a table, that's, like this is kind of the core influence, right? Or Spectre or something like that.
Yep.
These, you can't have, a book like this without an evil cabal of people trying to control everything.
Yes.
And they wind up having these really odd personality traits that I want to explore and expand on in rather significant ways in the prequel. And then in the sequel, this is the big spoiler, they're not around. And so the question is what happens to these people in Extinction Event? There are a number of fairly gruesome murders that happen. Ooh. And so it's not like a murder mystery per se, but it's just kind of like, just kind of circumstantial evolution of the story. And consolidation, if you will. So, but yeah, in the prequel, the people of the Plutonian Council is what I call them. And you might pick up on the idea that I'm a mythology buff. So, and prior to jumping into the program with St. Lawrence College, I attended a certification program. It was basically called Applied Mythology. It was through a group in California, and it was all online. And it's a group called Pacifica Graduate Institute, and they give out these certifications.
I would say I've heard of them before.
Yeah, it's great. They have great programs. They're they're very focused, and they're very, very narrow focus. So applied mythology is not being taught everywhere and all over the place, kind of thing. But the folks that I met in that program were really influential for me, and certainly all of the discussion. So AI came up then. But also the notions of relationships with animals and whether or not there's, their influence on us in our evolution, but of course, all of the mythology. So Pluto is the god of the underworld. And as the god of the underworld, Pluto is obsessed with objects, possessions and, digging for oil or resources, that kind of stuff. So the Plutonian Council is a reflection of that. Whereas Gaia, of course, is a straight up connection with Gaia, with the Earth goddess.
Yep.
And Sylvie Hunter is also, every name in the book has kind of a little bit of a little twist on it, as far as either a mythological reference or maybe a representation of somebody who's actually real in our world today. So I had a lot of fun with that. I have a lot of fun with the nomenclature of things.
See, and for me, I always have a hard time with naming characters. Like, that is the part that I'm the worst at, where I'm like, they're all named Bill. They're all going to be named Bill, Bob, and
Joe.
Randy.
Joe.
That's it, and Joe.
Jim.
Yeah, exactly. Like the most.
Jane.
Yep. Just go with like the most simple ones, and then later on go, okay, but I don't really like those names. But I tend to go.
Not everybody's named Bill or Bob or Jane.
Yeah. Are you doing Bob 2 is over here doing this. Bob 3 just walked through the door.
That's right.
So I love when people have names that are inspired by something, because to me, it's when I read books and I see something like the Plutonium
Council.
Thank you. It's like, I could not think of the simple word. It makes me want to look up into the name itself and like, okay, well, what does it come from? Does it come from the history of the god? Does it come from what used to be a planet? All those things were like, it sparks more thought for me when I'm reading. So I love when you do stuff like that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's why I try to do what I do. Is I just want to add a few extra little layers to things that, people, if they really want to, like I'll admit that, there's a great possibility I'm not the greatest writer in the world, but I do think about things, and I use writing as an excuse to research stuff.
Yes.
So if you want to find out about the economics that brought us to where we are, you want to find out about the large language models, Extinction Event will have that. If you want to get into kind of our media crisis, I do a little bit on that. You can look at the 1980s with, how deregulation of the FCC in the U.S. brought about, what I call both-sidism. When you have facts being confronted with opinions. And it's like, but these are facts. your opinion's not allowed. I mean, if you have extra research that, that actually negates those facts, that's a whole other ball of wax. But, when we're just talking about, both-sidism that just brings in opinions and just has people arguing with each other.
Yes.
And that's just bringing in ad revenue and not really getting the human race any further.
Yeah, 100%.
So my question, because I'm going to start heading down those rabbit holes.
All right.
My question is, when you got the idea for this book and you started writing it, do you have, like, somewhere deep down in your little core, do you think that this may actually happen?
Ooh.
That's a really tricky question, because I do think it could happen. And that's good and bad. It's like, I mean, I'm gonna be very modest and say, like, there's absolutely no way that I could ever think of myself comparing to somebody like James Cameron. But in some of the descriptions of the book, I describe it as Terminator meets Avatar.
Yes.
We have this artificial intelligence, we have this dystopian kind of future, but we have this potential for something that is just incredibly amazing and beautiful. And so I kind of position the book somewhere right in between. And I've had this discussion with my wife. It's like, well, do I? Once it's Schrodinger's, I can't even pronounce it, Schrodinger's cat.
Yep.
If you leave it in the box, you don't know if it's dead. If you open the box, it's dead. But so if I talk about this subject and put that idea out there, then is a fuel that somebody else is going to latch onto.
Yes.
And so any creator is always going to have to worry about that kind of an outcome. And it feeds, like, it's such a great question, because it's the essence of that philosophical debate about creation. And you put an idea out there. I don't want to say, like, I would love to see, really horrible things happen to a lot of humans, but at the same time, I want to see people really take seriously the what I call the polycrisis. This is a multitude of crises that we're facing right now, whether it's economic or equality or income distribution or climate change or animal extinction. All of those things are happening right now. And we really need to have the bejesus scared out of us in order to act on a path that will make the most sense for the future of the planet. Because I go back to the core piece for me is that Earth is so rare that it just seems so crazy that we're not doing everything we can to protect or preserve some of the many, many, many billions of things that are also unique to Earth. So, little lecture, sorry.
No, that's fine.
No, don't be sorry about that at all.
Never apologize to us.
That's kind of the stuff that I love to talk about and think about, even though it's one of those things where it's scary to think about.
Yeah.
Because you do have that curiosity of, like, I wonder that anytime that I watch certain movies about it, play certain video games where, so I'll use the Mass Effect example again. One of the races in it, like one of the species, the alien species, had um, robotic servants essentially.
Hmm.
And one day they ended up being upgraded so much that they became autonomous. And they asked the question of, does this unit have a soul? And after that, they're like, oh, okay, we screwed up. And they start trying to essentially put them all down. And it starts a war between the two species, the Geth and the I can't even remember what the name of the alien species is now, and that's bad on me. But it makes you wonder, like when I play something like that or watch something like that, there's always that curiosity of, could that be our future? Because so many people just think, oh, well, we're going to use technology to make life better. Oh, technology makes it
Yeah.
faster, easier, all these other things. Like, okay, but are we bringing ourselves to the extinction point, to the extinction event, and literally just
Right.
offering ourselves up and going, well, you know, Billy Joe over there didn't have an idea of any of this, and he went, yeah, I like this idea, and started putzing around with the mechanics on his end because he read a book, played a game, watched a movie, and went, yeah, I want to see what AI can do, what kind
Right.
of things
Yeah.
AI can
Yeah. Like
offer.
how far can I bring this, you know?
Exactly.
And it's very, very uniquely human to always
Yes.
try and push our boundaries, you know, just a little bit further. But um it just is a little bit of a sidebar. Like I was trained in the late 80s, early 90s as an economist. And one of the key things that I kept reminding myself in writing this book is that economics always relies very heavily on this kind of obscure notion that we have infinite possibilities, but we have a very finite planet. And people would argue that, well, we have endless amounts of, this and this and this. But if we toxify them, like water,
Yep.
it's of no use to both us and even the things that help clean the water, like all
Yeah.
the mussels and algae and all those other little ecosystems that exist. So yeah. I mean, it's cause and effect, and it's also a little bit of that discussion of fate versus free will,
Yes.
because in our Judeo-Christian history, we were created. Uh, you could say, okay, well, we were created. The cynic would say, well, we were created to basically just be playthings for God,
Yep.
for that amusement, or we were created to, have this bigger purpose, but that was never revealed, even though we consumed from the tree of knowledge. So somebody skipped a beat there somewhere. But
Someone had a little bite and went, nope.
yeah. Well, and everybody likes to blame Eve, which I think, she gets kind of a bum rap for that, like
Oh, 1,000,000%. Like,
Isn't it always the woman's fault?
according to basically
all
all of the Abrahamic religions, yes.
Yeah,
See, we told you not to.
She was the one who acted. She gave us reality. She gave us life,
It was
So
basically
power to
red
Eve.
pill versus the blue pill. She was like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm going to reality.
Sure. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's have some fun.
Exactly. Then we were like, oh man, you messed this up.
Yeah, but forever being bored versus finite period, finding things, discovering things, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's that discussion of fate versus free will, and we just we always just take it up a notch, right? So.
Yep. As the humans like to push that envelope, and then there's just the can't remember where I initially heard it, but the human hubris, where it's just like, okay, well, we're always just going to push forward because we always want to see, well, what can we do? Okay, well, this is the limit. This other guy's going to come and go, I can go here. Yeah, well, I can go here. Well, I can go right here.
And part of that logic is as well, if I don't do it, they're going to do it.
Yes, every time.
Isn't there a company out there, and again, it's Sunday morning, my brain's gone. But isn't there a company out there whose motto is always pushing forward?
Yes. I don't
know if it's a car manufacturer or
I want to say
even
yes.
like technological manufacturing. But I know the advertising part of my brain is telling me that somewhere some company has that motto, always pushing forward or always moving forward.
Yeah, or keep pushing forward or something.
Yeah, which
yep.
It's a common theme that certainly could be paraphrased in multiple different ways. Even if it's just something simple like just do it, or
yes.
Again, it's that, hey, Eve, just do it, like,
What's the worst that's going to happen?
What could happen? If you put on the shoes and you go out for a run and you have bad knees, then you blow out your knees, but
that's fine. They'll heal.
Yeah.
We'll get artificial ones for that. It'll all be fine.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, that was certainly one of the key themes that I kept kind of weaving back in and out of. And part of that theme with fate versus free will is real versus fake. And so many parts of the story rely on, I don't want to lean on it too much, because there wasn't like an overexposure to real versus fake, but it was discussed many times about like one person died in the Plutonian Council. So they had this meeting and they talked about, well, how are we going to, let's make sure that we get the right news stories out there so that the stock price doesn't take a hit. Yep. And, the guy was in charge of kind of the military and mercenary kind of focus of the group. And so when he was when he died, they're like, well, we don't want the mercenaries coming for us. So we have to make sure that they think he's still alive, or there's some, confusion about his circumstance. Yeah. So
that adds another neat little layer to it right there.
Well, for sure. But it's still consistent with that theme of, fate versus free will, because people on the outside who are not privy to that insider information, they're just going to take it for granted. They're just going to take it as one superficial layer of information, and they may not be able to really make great decisions because they are left with imperfect information or manipulated information. And we've seen that before.
Yes. Which I think that's part of the reason why I find the book interesting, is just because there's so many current things that are happening that you can link it back to, where it's okay, well, we all know, I mean, you used the perfect phrasing earlier, fake news.
Right.
We all know where that came from and how fast that caught fire, and now it's just like it's everyday life.
Yeah,
but
now I'm throwing it back.
But it's such a true statement at the same time, because you can watch the same news report or the same news being reported per se.
Yeah.
And it's going to have 52 different angles to it. Where one will say, oh, this poor person, oh, he was an anarchist, oh no, he did this, oh, he helped save the puppies in the burning school building. Yeah. Like, there's going to be 52 different ways.
Yeah.
They all could be telling the truth to some degree, but they could all be also trying to get the best angle that they think will push it more in the media and get them more viewership.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing, is how many people can you get to follow you? Yeah. Especially if you have something like that where you have a cabal that's like, okay, well, we want to control the masses, and the easiest way to do this is if we sprinkle this little bit of story here, little bit of story there, and we spin it like this. I mean, you can have freaking revolutions going on just by going, okay, well, this country reported it like this one reported it like this. Now they're mad at each other.
Yeah. Are you sure you haven't read the book?
Well, let's be honest here, Taylor, on what you said. with the sprinkling here, sprinkling
I
there.
was to say, what did
some
I say?
some of it only being truthful.
Mhm.
Look how often that has swayed a population's vote on a leader.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be
doesn't
politically
take
correct
much.
here. Because, like, said candidate running for office could say something that is so totally absurd and ridiculous.
Yeah.
But because you have that fake versus real,
Yeah.
those that are believing the fake that he's saying is real, you know?
Oh, God, yeah.
And what's going to happen? Like,
It's that legal situation where you create that little bit of doubt, that grain of doubt that
Exactly.
says, well, things, things should be the way they are because, something didn't happen the way that the fake media said that it did happen, or whatever, or somebody lied when, they said, such and such person raped them or something like that.
Yep.
So it's, it's a very, very powerful tool, and it's a very frightening time because we don't have, and this is why I got obsessed a little bit with the FCC and how things changed in the 1980s, because when they did change, prior to that, we had, the 3 or 4 stations that they would report, and they would report based on investigation, not narration. Now we have narration that basically reads from press releases and promotional brochures, that kind of stuff. And it's also very fragmented in the sense that we introduce that notion of both-sidism. And the other extension of part of this conversation is my interest in things, specifically related to writers like Philip K. Dick, who ultimately pushed the reader to question whether or not they were reading something that happened or not. So Philip K. Dick, just as a refresh for your audience, was a writer in the late 60s, 70s, very drug influenced, but also had this kind of his own personal kind of situation with reality. But he believed very much that we were in some kind of a generation of reality. And so he wrote things that wound up with things like Total Recall, Blade Runner, other stories that when you're watching it or you're reading the book, you're like, well, did that happen? Or somebody like Kurt Vonnegut, that brings in aliens, from different time frames. And in this case with Vonnegut, it was all about dealing with trauma. And so that was, those are my nods in terms of tipping that, where are we going in terms of the real versus fake? Because that's really, for me, the intriguing part of all of that. Kind of Matrix-like as well, of course. Huge influence for me. You mentioned the red pill, blue pill, and that's yeah, I just lapped that up. So.
Well, I think for a lot of us, or at least I should say for me, because when I think about even some of the video games that are my favorite and movies that are some of my favorite, I love those ones like you even mentioned Total Recall.
Yeah.
And yes, I know a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, it's cheesy." And don't get me wrong, it is. You watch the movie and it's cheesy as all could be now.
Yeah.
But the ideas behind each one of them is Earth becoming the dystopia that it is. And I mean, in a lot of the cases, it goes down to we ruin it.
Yeah.
Every single time we ruin it. And it's normally because we've done something with nuclear war. Like there's, because you mentioned it with Gaia being the mother goddess. And in, what is name? Horizon Zero Dawn, I believe it's the name of it if I'm remembering in the right order. Phenomenal, well done games. There's 2 of them out so far.
Yeah.
So well done, and that is exactly I love how, again, dystopia it is, because it shows we were ahead. Like, we got so far ahead of ourselves. We made great AIs. The world should have been in a fantastic state, but
Yeah.
we pushed it too far.
Yeah.
And the system actually ended up going against us, where it's okay, now you're living in a future where humans are now drawn back in time. And I think this is what I kind of love about it, is that it's actually drawn back in time where we're back in tribal settings,
Yeah.
and it's back to very much how it would have been done. I probably go back like as far as caveman kind of settings, where it's very simplistic stuff going on, and yet at the same time you have like a caveman tribal person going out and using specialty electrified arrows that they don't understand how they actually work because they don't remember it, shooting
Right.
down an electronic gazelle.
Right. Yeah.
And it's such a weird juxtaposition, because you're like, okay, it's futuristic, but also past at the same time, where you're like, I can see that kind of happening
Yeah.
for the human setting, just because we have things like that happening with the Extinction Event coming along going, okay, well, we had to make underground bunkers. We tried to shoot up in space. We all had different plans.
Yeah.
None of it really worked. And now we have this giant metallic draft thing that we're like, oh, that's kind of cool looking. It's a real
Yeah.
draft next door. And you're like, well, you're tiny compared to that. I'm going to shoot that down, though. That seems like a problem.
Yeah, I'm gonna take on the Goliath. Like
Yeah.
I'm David. I'm not gonna take on another Bill. I'm gonna take on Goliath because yeah, he's got a cooler name and he's got
Yep.
more chrome. And it gets yeah,
He's shiny in the sunlight.
yeah. And you were right with the name. I googled it while you were doing that segue. It is Horizon Zero Dawn, and that's on my to playlist. As a bit of a tangent, I tend to get locked into games that are made or developed by Ubisoft.
Yes.
So stuff like Assassin's Creed, and I loved and people. Can I swear?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
People shat all over Outlaws, and I think I have some theories on that. But I loved it. I think it was just like I grew up with Star Wars, and I didn't care what character I was playing. I just had a Star Wars universe that was wrapped in the Ubisoft onion, right? So it was like, those layers of like, okay, I gotta find stuff and I gotta explore, I gotta put things together, and I just love the game, and that's kind of the MO for all of their games is you've got
oh my God, yes.
It's all problem solving, right?
Well, that's why, like for me, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, and I'm a huge Ubisoft nerd.
Yeah.
Those are two of my favorite, like, I have a gigantic Star Wars collection. Dana can attest to that.
I can.
I am like, that is, we've had, I don't know if we haven't done a fully dedicated episode to Star Wars yet, but I know when it happens, Dana's going to be sitting going, why did I agree to this?
Yeah, sign me up. Because like we've all done our bit to help put George Lucas's kids to school, right?
Oh
grandkids, future grandkids. Oh yeah.
5 generations removed. It's like
we've all contributed to that fund, since the 1970s, and it's like, okay, yeah.
Oh,
my husband is in that same category with Taylor. He's a big Star Wars fan, and although I have not watched the first couple movies, I have watched on the Disney Channel with him the spin-offs, the
Mandalorian,
Ahsoka,
Obi-Wan.
Obi-Wan was really good, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like I've watched those, and I think he gets annoyed with me because I'm like, can you tell me? And he's like,
yeah. Well, it was in their series How I Met Your Mother, and the test was whether or not the girl would like Star Wars, and she's like, I don't get the walking bear.
Yes, that's exactly it. That is, 100%. Like one of my first exes had no idea about anything Star Wars, so I would say something and she'd be like, "What?" Like, oh. Like, I'm pretty sure it contributed to the fact that she's an ex now. Like, look, you're not understanding it. You're using the wrong names for all of these people. I'm like, this isn't going to work. This is clearly
That's
not
right.
destined to be.
That's
The
right.
Force has spoken.
Yeah.
But
Why are they cooking everything on woks? No, it's Ewoks.
And you know, since we're talking AI and Star Wars now, was it not in The Mandalorian where when Din Djarin turned over the child to Luke Skywalker, it was a deep fake?
so I mean, technically it's not deep fake because it's everyone knows it, but it's like amazing to me what they can do with today's technology by putting some
Yeah.
dots on his face and literally essentially photoshopping
Yeah.
His young
his-
face?
yeah, because that's
Yeah.
exactly how they did it, because the first time they used that was in Rogue One for Tarkin and for Princess
Yes.
Leia,
Yeah.
because that was the first time. That was brand new technology when they did that. They're like, they called it's de-aging technology is what Disney's called it.
Yeah.
So they
I've
literally
seen it.
go in and just youngify them.
Yeah, and I just saw it with something I forget what it was, but with Harrison Ford. But
Indiana Jones, the most
yeah,
recent one.
Oh,
yes,
really?
yeah,
Yeah, I think in his case, they actually they put the dots on his face and just
yeah,
they de-aged him. He looked like he did back in the first Indiana Jones.
yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna pull us back as a segue because it's a perfect segue. All the talk about Star Wars, because what got me into myth and what ultimately got me into writing was it's like, for me, it's the quote unquote Bible of video conversation with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers in The Power of Myth. And that was released, I think it was about 85 on PBS. And the two of them sit down and they talk about stuff. And Joseph Campbell, again, for your audience, he was an encyclopedic mythologist. He knew everything about anything about myth, symbol, Jungian psychology, archetypes, the hero's journey. That's all part of his basket. And he was basically an acting consultant with George Lucas in developing the heroes and the archetypes that are in Star Wars.
Yes.
And so, you have the old wise sage who's the mentor, and I stole some of that, some of those elements and put them into Extinction Event. So the mentor is LP's recording instructor, and he introduces him to the next person who brings them further along in the journey. Then there's there's a number of other characters that have these various archetypes associated with them. And just as a little sidebar, so LP is the main character, and I didn't want to. We talked about like how I like to overthink names, but this one was really just the most gross simplification. LP. I started in my notes, like doing the storyboarding and the sketching, and it was just short for lead protagonist. And and then as the story evolved, and the guy was a huge music aficionado, which I am, and LP is. Of course, LP is also short for long play, like long play vinyl. And LP.
That's where my brain went immediately the first time that I read LP. I'm like,
exactly.
I'm going with old vinyl for this.
Exactly. And so his prequel character is a DJ in England in the 1990s. And so he, he's obsessed with the kind of all of these scenes that start out of. So he's just at the tail end of what they call the new romantic era with, bands like the Human League or Talk Talk or the Smiths even. And then he gets into the 90s with a sound or a scene that's called Manchester. It's a number of groups that come from Manchester, and they had a whole other kind of worldly experience compared to what else was going on in the world. The biggest band from Manchester is Oasis, but there's a whole other, and the Smiths were originally from Manchester as well. But there's a whole raft of bands that came out of that area and that scene that were very much into dancing, partying, DJing, that kind of stuff. So,
do you think that led to techno?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. So I have to think about that for a second because there are genres that I'm not as familiar with. I tend to come from like the heavy influence 60s AM radio kind of thing, So it was like a mix of Frank Sinatra and Neil Young, and then maybe maybe an ELO song thrown in. So it was all family friendly. But so as I evolved in my musical interests, I did my best to avoid grunge. But I went for instead like kind of that Oasis / Manchester / another band like the Charlatans or Primal Scream. They're all great bands. Now my current favorites are bands like Wilco or The National, what they call sad dad rock, like the mopey middle-aged white guy rock. Yeah. And,
that's being used as a hashtag.
Yeah.
So I've never heard of sad dad music.
The band The National has actually made a number of T-shirts that actually say "Sad Dad Member," and they sell that music. So yeah, but so back to your question, is it related? So DJing goes back as far as I with kind of a mainstream aspect into the late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
And it was largely African American influenced, Brooklyn, especially New York, that kind of thing. And now I'm kind of out of my depth because I just don't have enough experience with it. All I know is kind of the whiteified version of that, like the Beastie Boys or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which really isn't techno, but they used a lot of things like the slide records, and they used a lot of the techniques and stuff. But when I think of DJing, I think of like a club, like a rave, with like just the the boomcha 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 kind of sounds, and and then people just interlaying their different favorites as far as just swapping out different discs and stuff. So.
The sampling of the classics.
Yes.
I know, not that I did a lot of clubbing in my day, but I know that some of the parties that I went to where DJs were present, they would take LPs from the 70s and sample them into like techno beats.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's still big even today. What I've found, and I actually enjoy it, but for me, I love like all music, all over the place, whether it's heavy metal, rap, techno.
No country.
She's against country. I'm fine with some, not all, but some. But I love classical music. And what I've actually found recently on the YouTubes is techno classical music. So it's literally people have taken classical music like Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and they've made it techno with it. And I'm like, I like this.
Yeah.
I get both things in what I'm enjoying this now.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you could take a classical piece, and this is be sacrilege for somebody like my brother-in-law who's a classical music composer. But you could take a classical piece, add a beat, and then put in a couple of risers or a couple of pad synths and stuff like that, and it'd be pretty cool.
I would say that's how I feel about it, where I'm like,
Oh.
music for me is just a great kind of form of communication. Because I mean,
Absolutely.
well, a lot of people, like, obviously we joke about it now, but you think about back in the day, you would make mixtapes, which
Yeah.
required a lot of effort to try and
Yeah.
get it at that right time. You're like, okay, the DJ stop talking, record now. And you try to get it recorded at the right time.
Calm
What?
yourself. You were born in the 90s.
I still had to do it that way. That is how you still had
I'm
to
a
record
child of the
things.
Yeah, the
70s.
teak recorder, waiting for the DJ to shut up, and then hitting
Yep.
record and play at the same
And
time.
go.
And, yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
have your mother shouting in
I
the
know.
background, and you're like, you ruined it.
Why are you
There was-
talking during this?
And
But-
there was as kind of a segue that something you mentioned earlier, and I'm shifting gears a little bit. So to finish, where I contributed in terms of the music thing is ultimately how Gaia communicates with animals. And
Oh, okay.
and that is this is kind of like the key element, and it's really of interest to me because to kind of you mentioned, Taylor, you mentioned a point about music being this incredible mode of communication, and of course it's a little bit like that that movie, it was with Jodie Foster, and it was about how math is the universal language, and
Yes.
and sure it is, of course. I know mathematicians that would be like, of course it is, but music
God,
is
yeah.
is just it provokes that response that math doesn't, and so you could have a nice symphonic piece, or you could have a nice beat, or you could have a jazz piece, or gazillion versions of different things under the sun that elicit various responses from people. And
Yes.
and this was the gateway through which Gaia found ways to communicate with animals. So I found that was me taking my experience with the music world, understanding frequencies, because the human hearing range, I'm going to do a little box here with my eyes, and that's the human hearing range, and then the animal hearing range is this. So we've got from 0 to about 400,000 hertz. Whereas the human range is about 20 hertz to about 20,000 hertz. And it's a little bit like being at a pub where there's a little bit of that noise, but you don't even know what you're not hearing. Right?
Yes.
And so if we're going to communicate with animals, then we have to be able to find ways to adjust our listening equipment. And I think people are making efforts in some of those respects, like the Earth Species Project, or there's another group that actually Peter Gabriel is a member of. It's called interspecies.io. And they are working on things, and same with the SETI Institute, where they look, where it's the Oceanic Research Group that looks at cetaceans and their communication. So, but my talking points about it is that we listen in this range, so we're hearing the C and the J and maybe the Q of that language, but we're not hearing that whole alphabet that's being spoken. And then we're also not hearing, kind of the intonation, the different dialects, or the different ways that, research has shown that whales from Alaska, have different accents compared to whales from Australia or something. And it's just dialect. We see that with humans all the time. So why wouldn't it be present with animals?
And I think that's the thing, is that to me, I always think it's human ignorance and ego when we sit there and go, yeah, clearly they can't understand. Like when people say, it annoys me to no end, when people say, oh, well, animals are just stupid, they can't understand you. Like, I'm positive that they can understand every freaking word that comes out of my mouth. Because let
Yeah.
me tell you, I have watched all of the pets that I've had growing up.
Yeah.
Depending on what word you say, they will either look and go, oh, yay, or hey, do you want a bath? I will bite your face off. Like, you can see the difference. No different than a human. You can
Yeah.
tell by tone. And I
Well,
do love that we're starting to get that technology now and research behind it that shows exactly that they have different tones. They do understand. They have ways of communicating. It's
yeah.
just different from our own. Like
Yeah.
you said, we have a small range of things that we can do.
Yeah.
And when you think about even in our small range of communication that we have, there's still 5 million different ways to do it based
Yeah.
on where you go in the world.
Yeah.
Some people, the difference between using your right hand and your left hand
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
some places
Can be really offensive.
very, very bad. You go and like, oh, hi, I'm left-handed. And they're like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Where did you
no.
have that before?
Yeah, exactly. That is not what you use that for. And you're like,
Yeah.
it's my
Yeah.
left. I don't understand.
And you touch on a lot of really important points because I think if we're gonna save the planet, we have to erase a lot of human hubris.
Yes.
We have to come to grips with the fact that these things are sentient creatures. They are capable of understanding, and they're actually probably smarter than we are because they have an off button. You don't see animals, like I did a little bit of research. There are certain, things like viruses or algae or other things that destroy their environment, but there's not many. Like lions won't overeat in a
Yep.
in a specific season. They will breed and mate and create a population that is consistent with the gazelle or impala population
food
in the
source,
area.
Yes.
So in that respect, like for me, it's understanding that they're actually probably quite much more intelligent than humans are because they have an off button.
So-
and the other part of that is that so many of these animals, these creatures, like you take a shark, they probably don't say much because they've had 650 million years of learning how to minimize what they need to say.
Yep.
They just they come to this point where they realize they just it sounds kind of crazy, but at the same time it's like, well, they exist in their ecosystem and they know that they continue to exist in that ecosystem, and they don't need to invent rockets to Mars to prove that existence to themselves.
Yeah.
And I find that weirdly admirable.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And the other segue I was going to point out is that you had mentioned kind of going with the video game. What was it? New Dawn Horizon? Did I get that over? New
Horizon Zero Dawn. I can
Horizon
almost
Zero Dawn.
never remember the order of those freaking
It's
words.
on my to play list, but and it reminded me that the book begins with a prologue that takes us back about 15,000 years, where it's prehistoric. It's and it really tries to crack open the egg of like the relationship of men versus women, the relationship of humans versus animals, and then introduces the book that way, having you hopefully scratching your head saying like, there's a lot of stuff and weirdness going on right in the prologue, and it's like, well, that's that was 20,000 years ago. So,
and yet it still heavily influences today.
Yes, yeah. Well, my wife and I we had the privilege of being in Spain, and we went to a Picasso exhibit, and there was a number of quotes there where Picasso said, like the humans really haven't invented anything new in terms of art since the cave times, because he went to the caves in Altamira in northern Spain, and he came out and he's like, I'm still doing the same thing, like, I
Yep.
mean, the caves were the original social media, it was just, people, sitting down doodling and saying, well, this animal ate Bill, and and so I'm going to draw this, and Bob just sat there eating popcorn, and so I'm going to draw this, and that's the way it happened, and meanwhile, Joe got really upset and therefore decided all animals suck, so we went out
Yep.
and started killing animals, and so it's a very simplistic look at how our cultural evolution happened, but at the same time, I think I like the idea of trying to peel those apart and try and understand like what our relationship is with different creatures and how they had an impact or influence on our evolution as a society, like whether it's empire building or, domestication led to, cities led to tax keeping led to urban development. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, all these little cause and effects type things. And so the book very much became part of that as well.
Good.
Dana,
good,
do you
good,
remember
good.
your thought that you were going to have 2
No.
seconds ago?
Nope.
Oh, sorry.
Nope,
I
that's
rambled.
okay. No, I have a very bad short-term memory, so I'm good.
That's okay.
You just see the error symbol there, just going flash, 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 flash,
Yeah.
flash.
Yeah, you need the 404 symbol, like as
Yeah.
part of the Zoom calls. Like, okay, no, the page not found.
Yeah, page not found, exactly.
Press back.
Yeah, you just keep buffering, and you're like, it's not good. We
Yeah.
have to unplug her and plug her back in.
Yeah. Well, I had that yesterday. So, like, I mean, it was like I got something, and I'm sometimes I'm a little bit like a fly at a picnic, if you haven't picked that up right now. But it's like, my wife and I were driving home from downtown, and we're driving along Bath Street, which is kind of a central, east-west street. And I was talking about something very important, obviously, and then I look and I'm like, ooh, look at that. It's like, and then, oh, what was I talking about? And I was like, and my wife's like, I don't know. Not sharp like that, but just like, I don't know. Like you got distracted. And yeah, it happens to all of us. So
That is 1,000,000% how basically all conversations go with Dana and I, where we're like, yeah, so then I was thinking that, bird.
yeah.
And you
Yeah.
come back and you're like, what was I saying? I don't know. You didn't finish your thought.
Yeah.
Oh, it left.
You should see us playing video games. Oh.
Okay, to be fair, yesterday, I don't know if you've played the games. The old games were Left 4 Dead, and then now there's Back 4 Blood, which is now basically the continuation of the series. There's zombie games, which are always our favorite to play. And it was one of those things yesterday of I was hit by the dumbstick as we were trying to figure out how to play, which I think as you get older, you forget how to do things and they overcomplicate things, so you can't even freaking get the games to go. But I couldn't get my headset to work
Oh, right.
for like, had to be 10, 15 minutes. I'm sitting there Googling. I'm like, okay, update my controller, doing everything. Finally flip it over. I look at it, I'm like, a little slotty thing here. That's not over it. Is that supposed to be over it? So I just pushed really hard. Hear it click. And she's like, okay, are you ready to try it? I don't think mine's working. I'm like, no. Dumbass over here, me. I think just figured out what it was. Sure enough, turned it on, get into the chat, and she's like, can you hear me? I'm like, yep, can you hear me? Yeah, I didn't push it in all the way. Here I am cursing it. And I had told her before, I'm like, yeah, I couldn't get it working the last time I tried using it. Only works if you actually push the connectors all the way in.
Yeah, that's something that a guy doesn't want to hear. But anyways,
That was good.
So yeah, I mean, some of the other parts. So jumping into kind of like what's next for me. I've applied for a program my brother sent me an article about this guy who went through this program, and it really intrigued me because I always had this desire to do a master's degree. It was just kind of a personal, I don't know, maybe it sounds cool, like I'm a master of something, you know. And
Yes.
The program is in Halifax. It's with King's College at Dalhousie. It's a Masters of Fiction, Master of Fine Art and Creative Fiction, and I'm in the process of applying for that. So hopefully that comes through. And what they do is they take a book that you might be working on, which I am right now. And they introduce you to editors and the process with, you know, finessing your product so that, you know, you could advance your skills. And I found that whole idea very intriguing because I've got not my prequel and sequel. I actually had another book written when I was living in London, and I wrote it from 2006 to 2008. And it takes place in 2008, and I had the whole book saved, the whole manuscript, and I'm in the process now over the holidays. I was just editing it quite a bit, actually. And now I've got to get that kind of touched up, and that'll be published early in the new year, I hope. And that'll probably be the book that I use with this program.
Oh.
Excuse me. And it's, again, it's about a guy who, he gets involved with corporate espionage, and it turns out to be a very very slippery slope in terms of discovering this really kind of a crazy religious cult, and again, very Plutonian Council-ish, with a number of people who are using their financial gains in 2008 to ultimately try to, shall we say in a phrase, like, control the planet.
Yep.
So again, very Spectre-ish, very Darth Vader-ish, Empire-ish kind of influence, but yeah. So somebody had to go in there and mess things up a little bit, which is where the character takes it.
I like that. And I'll be curious to see, once you get to publishing it and reading it, curious to see how it reads from a 2008 perspective compared to what we have now coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of freaked me out a couple of times because I had written about stuff that is happening now, almost 20 years ago. And I actually stopped with the process of pushing it forward because there were 2 or 3 predictions in it that happened. One was the financial crisis, and the other one was a massive earthquake that happened in China that wound up killing like 70,000 people. And it was like, wow, this is really curious. Not like I had anything to do with it, but I just felt like I just felt a little bit freaked out by it. So the fates
Suddenly
in the
you're
world were
becoming
telling
Nostradamus.
Yeah. So, the muses were saying, now was not the time. 2008 was not the time, but 2004 it'll be okay. So
You're like, okay, we can do this now.
Yeah.
So is that book set in the future or at that time?
It's set in 2008.
Okay.
And it's the main themes are a little bit consistent with Extinction Event. There's a lead protagonist. He gets drawn into he was a bit of a fuck up, and he couldn't really hold the job. And it starts really with this basic idea that if you can't hold a job in a capitalist world, you're always going to be struggling. You're always going to be, fighting up against the waves.
Yep.
And so he decides, okay, you know what? I'm gonna dive right in, and I'm gonna go with the flow, so to speak, and work from the inside and make a pile of cash selling corporate information. and he does okay with it. And then he gets a gig that really opens things up for him. And part of the story deals with very misogynistic, male-driven religious cult that, basically sees women as breeders. We've heard that before, stuff like Handmaid's Tale.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, in my best of best worlds, is like the analogy I use. Like if I could write one crappy Paul McCartney song, it would still be a better song than everybody else. Like that's
Yep.
where my admiration for Paul McCartney goes. So if I could write one really crappy take on something like Handmaid's Tale, and still be compared to something like Handmaid's Tale, I'd be like, yeah, that's awesome. Not that I want to write a crappy version. I just want to write, because it's set the bar so high.
Oh yeah.
That anything is kind of similar-ish would always be compared. And if even just be in the ring with somebody like Margaret Atwood would be like a huge reward for me. Is comparison. So,
well, before we wrap things up, how about you let our listeners know where they could procure a copy of said book?
Oh, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. BillWittur.com, BILL, Wittur, WITTUR.com. It kind of becomes the point at which it directs you to either Amazon, where I have one book, which is the Extinction Event, but I also have a collection of poetry that I wrote during the pandemic, and that was related to a number of songs that I wrote and recorded that emulate the hero's journey in 12 songs. And it was very intentional as far as the structure of the songs went. They all were in different keys, different tempos, different moods, but they kind of capture that cycle, and it was very pandemic oriented. So as you if you know the hero's journey, there's kind of that step 4 where you're entering the unknown, that dark world, and it's a very, I don't want to say a very dark song, but it's a very kind of, frustrated, kind of like what the hell's going on kind of song.
And have you published that?
It's on Amazon as well. It's called Bliss. And it just, steals from Joseph Campbell influence. He says, follow your bliss. So part of that also, I'm, when writing poetry, we're not supposed to have side notes about, what we were, like, why did I call the flower yellow or something? But this was a very personal journey that I wrote about. And it deals with struggles with family and alcoholism and other issues. So there's like the 12 steps of the AA route. There's the 12 steps of, everything. 12 has very high, metaphysical and mythological kind of orientation, whether it's the 12 apostles or 12 astrological signs. It has a lot of, or even 12 notes in a scale in music. And so, that's why I kind of got obsessed with that one thing. So you can see when there's a loose thread on my sweater, the sweater just rips. Yeah, I just rip it all apart, because
and this is how I did the sweater.
I don't let it go. So
you
I go down
unravel
those
it and
rabbit
get a
holes.
new one.
So so to get back to your question, Amazon. There's EPUB versions available in different places like Kobo and Apple. The EPUB versions are available for both of those books. And I'm gonna close off. I say thank you so much. I've had a lovely conversation.
Well, we thank you for coming on. I mean, I understand it took us 3 months to get our shit together.
yeah, but it was worth it. It was worth the wait. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And I look forward to talking with you again, because I've kind of, like let things go. Like I've opened things up, and now it's like I've got this one book, and I've got a couple of prequel, sequel, and I've got some other poetry and stuff that I'm slowly unveiling, and I feel really good about, finally, hitting the writing role, because I always spent most of my life trying to please other people with, well, should I do this job as an economist? Should I do this job as in the financial industry, or should I do this? And now it's just Bill as a writer, and it's what I love best, so.
And that's, you feel like your true authentic self.
Yeah.
I completely understand that.
Yeah. Somebody once said, like we do these things that are like the top 40 under 40. And I'm like, up to 50 was a trial run. Like I'm just getting started now. I'm so excited.
Now it's just the free trial you get.
Yeah. So now we need the over 50. Okay, yeah, you passed the trial run. Congratulations, you made it. So now what are you gonna do?
Right. So when we post, our episodes are available on Spotify.
Great.
So you will be, for lack of a better term, hoard out on Spotify, X, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And we will include, if you so want to, you can send me your socials.
Yes.
If you have like book related socials, and I can publish all of those with the episode, and we can see if we can get you some more fans.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. I love it. Yeah. Likewise.
Because honestly, like I have started reading your book, but life. So now that the holidays are over and things are slowing down and I have a moment to breathe, I want to get back into it, because honestly, I was very captivated by it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though I'm only like 25 pages in, I'm like, ooh,
Yep.
So I do want to finish it, and at that point, if Taylor can get her ass in gear and get it finished along with me, we'd love to have you back. So we can
20 years.
I'm happy to, be like that live-in resident, like the artist in residence, like just kind of like, oh, Bill, come on, what are you talking about here? Like this is just, this is nonsense. And be like, well, like let's hash it out, So I love that you're reading it. Thank you.
I would love to talk to you after I finish reading it. I'd love to have that better conversation, to be all like, okay, listen, this part.
As you're saying, we're gonna have it hashtagged as spoilers galore.
Spoiler alert.
Do not watch if you have not read any of it, or you don't like spoilers.
That's right.
For the love of God, look away.
I will be extremely flattered when we have that conversation. Like the idea that people are reading and enjoying, hopefully, what I put together. I really look forward to it.
Awesome.
Yep, I can't wait to get further into it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being on the show, Bill. We absolutely appreciate you, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Oh, God.
All right. Absolutely. Will do.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care. Have a great 25.
Thank you. You too.
Take care. Bye.